Hello and welcome to the Invictus F1 podcast with me, Gareth, and as always, Sab. How are you doing, Sab?
Yeah, I'm okay, thank you. Well, we're here once again, aren't we? These weeks seem to be flying through. It doesn't seem 5 minutes. We was chatting away in the no assist race on Monday night. We've had another action-packed week in Invictus throughout. Not just no assists, but performance in equal leagues. Yesterday we had a very interesting Russian Grand Prix and some very interesting news coming out of that. So plenty to chat about this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. 15th episode of this, so you've got plenty to go back and listen to. If you're new to the podcast, of course, you can listen back on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, and equally, all of the podcasts are uploaded to this YouTube channel. So make sure you click on that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And yeah, getting into it. We'll go straight into the big news that came out of the paddock over the weekend with the Russian Grand Prix, and we'll do our recap of that Russian Grand Prix a little bit later in the podcast. But we'll start with huge news really coming out of Woking, out of McLaren, and that is a return to Mercedes power. And obviously, if you listen often, you know that Sab is a super fan of McLaren, so he's the perfect person to be talking to with their opinion of this move. And what do you think from your point of view? We talked about it briefly earlier this week, and I'm sure you've had a few extra days just to think over the potential pros and cons of this McLaren-Mercedes deal.
Um, it's tough to say because the initial reaction was of surprise. I thought for a while that McLaren would be with Renault at least in going into the new regulations in 2021. So when the rumours started circulating, was it around Thursday, Friday when there was like rumblings of it, and then it was made official Saturday morning. It was a surprise. It's a good surprise, and it's also mixed feelings for me. And I still feel like that now because, yes, it's good news that McLaren are getting on board with, let's say, the best team in the hybrid era, quite comfortably the best team in the hybrid era. So to get on board with their engines, their reliability, their power, it can only be a good thing, can't it? Because you're going to have that more reassurance that you're going to be able to not only finish races but be able to perform well in races with such an engine. But my my mixed feelings is my big question is why? Why now have Mercedes agreed to this? Because when McLaren was trying to get rid of Honda, Mercedes at the time basically just said no chance, you're not having them, and they also said no chance to Red Bull as well, didn't they? And because of the threat, so why have Mercedes now done a U-turn on McLaren and said yes, you can have our engines, especially if McLaren, with their current upturn in form, they're starting to get the management structure all set now with Andreas Seidel coming in. You've got James Key who's coming out, making the car as well, and this wind tunnel's in preparation to being built. So everything now for McLaren behind the scenes is all in place now for them to start moving back in the direction where they want to be. And this season's proven it, hasn't it? They've been the best team outside the top three. So I find it bizarre that if McLaren are starting to find these gains on the chassis side, on the aero side of the car, if then they get given the opportunity to bolt in an engine which is superior to that Renault, no disrespect to Renault, but if they do, then surely I'm not going to say they're going to be challenging Mercedes because I think that's a bit crazy to be honest. You're going down the similar road when Eric Boullier was saying Honda are going to win championships with McLaren. You don't want to go silly like that. But for me, if McLaren keep this momentum going and they start finding really good gains, then they're obviously going to eventually challenging for podiums and potential wins. So why would Mercedes like? Why would Mercedes want that? Why would Mercedes want a team potentially challenging them for race wins? Because they certainly didn't want Red Bull doing that. And if Red Bull had that Mercedes power in the back of that car, I'm sure Max Verstappen this season would easily be a championship contender against Lewis. So for me, it is a bit bizarre and makes you wonder, especially me. I'd like to hear your opinions as well. It makes me wonder what are the inner details of this deal because it looks all good from the outside, but I'm just curious and I'm a bit skeptical of what really has gone on to make this deal happen.
Well, from what I've read and what I've listened to over the last week or so, and I was looking at a couple of Autosports articles about what happens, is that they aren't particularly keen on Renault's look into the future, and Renault were potentially asking to be sharing gearboxes and sharing suspension units, and McLaren wanted to be a separate entity, not controlled or not sharing any sort of parts with a team that they are a customer of. So I can understand McLaren looking at trying to get out of that deal if they thought that Renault would only give them a power unit on a caveat that they shared some of this tech, especially if Renault start to think that McLaren are getting ahead of them as they are in this constructors championship, that it's the best way to rein them in is we'll give you the engine, but you have to give us some of your tech in recompense. So I think Mercedes offered them the chance of being autonomous, and Toto Wolff and Zak Brown both sat down and they both said that it's purely a power unit deal. There's nothing else going on behind the scenes, but it does get slightly deeper, and there have been reports coming out about several different things that may or not be part of this deal, and one of those, and that's come out today, is that the one of the main proprietors in the financing of the deal to get Mercedes back with McLaren is a company headed up by Lando Norris's father. And it turns out that, as is reported, and we will say this is as is reported, that Mercedes are looking at having him under Mercedes management from the future. So no longer under McLaren management. He would be joining the Mercedes Young Driver program. So is a secret caveat part of this deal is that they get to steal what we would say is McLaren's golden goose in their 19-year-old superstar Lando Norris.
See, if this is true, I personally pray it is not true. If it is true, I think McLaren are absolutely crazy to pretty much give up their next big star. Arguably, the biggest young talent they've had through the ranks since Lewis. So if you've got this huge talent on the cards, why would you give him up so easily just to get a deal with Mercedes for some engines? That for me sounds so mad. I find it very frustrating. I can understand, by almost just looking at it from Lando's point of view for a second, I can totally understand from Lando's point of view that he's eventually going to be wanting to be in a race-winning car. He wants to be able to win races, challenge for championships, as all drivers do, because that is the reason why they're in Formula One. But for me, I'd surely want to just... McLaren are the team that have given him this opportunity in Formula One, and yes, maybe another team would have done if it wasn't McLaren, but still, I find it bizarre that McLaren would just loosen their grip on their big talent like this if it is true, and I would, as a fan, be quite upset and frustrated with the team if that is the case, because you don't want to see big talents like this just given away so easily, because they don't always come around so quickly. You look at, for example, go to Max Verstappen quickly. Look at the efforts Red Bull have gone to make sure they keep hold of their star driver. They pretty much were happy, or not happy, but as long when Daniel Ricciardo left, they just happily enough made it Max's team. They may also have renamed it the Max Verstappen race team. Everything just suits him down to a T now. And yes, Red Bull are in a better position than what McLaren are, because they can some races fight for wins. But for me, if I was McLaren, I'd be doing anything possible after the season Lando's had. Yes, he's had some struggles, but most of that is not down to him. After the season he's had so far, his breakthrough season, I'd be doing anything possible to nail him down to a long-term deal at the team, because, like I say, it's not often talents like him come through the ranks, and if we have given him up so easily, I think it's just lunacy, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that he had only signed a 1 year extra deal, and because he had only announced that he was racing as part of the 2020 season, so there was nothing ahead of that. Which, yeah, it could be a huge sort of missed opportunity on the part of McLaren there, because what happens if they? Because this is one of the things that Toto Wolff said as part of the announcement deal with them powering McLaren, is that they kind of they've taken this on as a risk that McLaren are are currently the fourth best team on the grid. But what happens if they do completely redesign the car, and they start to challenge the main team? And that's what we've seen happen across several other iterations of Formula One, is of main teams starting to come under threat from customer units. And it's yeah, it is a big risk for Mercedes, but if they've managed to get into a position where they can convince Lando that they can take him on, and possibly, by the looks of it, partner him up with George Russell, who he's obviously gets on with, and he's known for a long time, and potentially partner up with Russell for 2021, but this time as part of a who is currently on for a sixth double driver and constructors championship in the light. So it's the pull for Lando is unavoidable, and we saw. I think the difference here, comparing up against Lewis, is that Lewis went after winning a world championship with McLaren. Um, but if Lando doesn't think that that McLaren are going to be able to give him that car, then it's like anyone in any sport, he's going to look to find that upgrade. And if a caveat for this engine deal is that he goes under Mercedes management, and he's going to sit in McLaren for, I don't know, for the next year or so, and then potentially take over from Bottas, or potentially a retiring Lewis Hamilton, then I don't know, it's huge news. It's massive. It would be a huge loss for McLaren, because really, like, they've kind of set Lando up very much, as you said, as their next Lewis Hamilton, as their next young British star that the British community can get behind. And we know, and I'm sure this is a big reason, Mercedes know that Lando is absolute money when it comes to promotion wise, because he's so his demeanor around the paddock, the way he is with on social media, the way he is with the media, he's very marketable, and Mercedes will lap that up if they have the opportunity. And McLaren have done a brilliant job in nurturing him. But unfortunately, if you look below Lando, I believe it's Sergio Sette Camara that's currently in F2,
Yeah.
that's in F2 as part of the McLaren driver program after they dropped Nick de Vries. Um, and I don't think Sette Camara is ready for Formula One. Well, I don't think he ever will be ready for Formula One. I think he's a good driver, but I don't think he's a Formula One driver. Whereas Nick de Vries probably, I imagine if this does come to fruition, we do see Lando transfer over to Mercedes management, that Nick de Vries would have been perfect to step into that McLaren seat.
He would have been, yes, and unfortunately, because he just didn't get the chances, did he? With like testing and stuff like that, it just never worked out. And now, I think it's just briefly talking about Nick De Vries. It is a bit of a loss, really, that he's heading into Formula E with Mercedes and Stoffel. I think there was an opportunity if there was a seat available for him, of course. But I think if he were ever to get in Formula One, I can't see why he wouldn't do a job there. He's proved this season that he's a good racing driver, winning the F2 Championship like he has done. But for me, my question is, what I'd like to ask you is, if McLaren were to lose Lando for 2021, I assume they would keep hold of Carlos, because Carlos seems very settled and happy at the team. But who comes in his replace? I heard one silly rumor today that Fernando's now got his eye on it, and I was like, for God's sake, no, we don't want Fernando back in. Thank you very much, because even though he's been eyeing up that Mercedes power for a while now, I just think that is a recipe for disaster if he come in, and especially an ever aging Fernando as well. So my question for you is, who do they bring in if they have a spare seat for 2021? Who do they partner alongside Carlos Sainz?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because there isn't, I mean, at the moment there isn't a particularly strong lineup in the junior formula that you'd say is ready to come into Formula One. And we know that McLaren like to promote youth. But like I said, they don't have a particularly strong lineup when it comes to their driver program, compared to the likes of Renault or Mercedes, who have got quite a decent man, and Ferrari. And we talked last week about the fact that they've got the likes of Robert Schwartzman and Marcus Armstrong sitting in F3, most likely about to jump up to F2. Equally, Mick Schumacher. So it is tricky, because they'd probably have to look at a driver that's probably in F3 at the moment, and yeah, I can't think of anyone really that kind of stands out that would go into that program, and I think the most likely would be Nick de Vries. Now the problem is that now he's under a Mercedes contract, much like Stoffel Van Dorn, much possibly like Lando Norris. So McLaren are seemingly losing out all of their drivers or ex-drivers to Mercedes. So this is either an absolutely brilliant underhanded tactic by Mercedes to just mop up McLaren's sort of lack of foresight, or they're going to have to pay Mercedes quite a bit of money to try and get a relatively young star in a Formula One car. But yeah, it is a big decision if it does happen. But I mean, it does come with a lot of barriers have got to come in between us. We've got to expect that Lewis does retire at the end of 2020. Is that when he can potentially match Schumacher's 7 world championships there? He's most likely going to get the record of 91 wins. So you'd think that after that he would go off into the distance and enjoy his exploits into fashion and music like he enjoys now. But we're potentially saying, I mean, they're still holding on to the management of Ocon. So would it be Ocon? That I can't see Esteban going back into Mercedes after going to Renault. I think Renault will be quite happy to keep a French driver as part of that team. I think they've been after a French driver for a long time as Renault, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Esteban Ocon stay there for a while. But yeah, it's a huge decision, and it would be a huge loss for McLaren. But huge losses is equally the part of Renault. Now, where do Renault go from here? Because losing McLaren mean they lose their one and only car that they're currently supplying an engine to. And that's a huge chunk of money that's currently coming into the French manufacturer. So where does this put them? Because they've invested a huge amount of money into the Formula One team recently, and the stakeholders and the shareholders have said that they've invested a lot of money and they expect results. Now, if they lose this money coming in from Woking, what happens to this team? Do they? I don't know. Does Renault start to fall back into obscurity?
That's a very good question, and I think it was recently as well. Danny Ricciardo's annual salary also came out. It was around £28 million a year, which is it's just astronomical. It's easily put him up there, one of the highest paid Formula One drivers on the grid, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it, with them losing that money from McLaren and also losing valuable data in a way, because they're not getting 2 extra cars to give them information on engine issues or anything that any upgrades at work, for example. So to lose that as well, it does, I think, personally puts them on the back foot. Cyril Abiteboul did say it makes us whole, it makes us a one unit now. We don't have to worry about supplying other teams, but I think it's a bad thing, really, and it also, for me, shows that people are they just don't want Renault engines, do they? Red Bull was for years moaning about the engines until they finally got rid of them for Honda, and McLaren seemingly, it looked like on the outside a decent deal until what you said with Renault trying to form this like mega partnership, which I agree with you. For me, that should never work for McLaren, because effectively what Renault are trying to do is turn McLaren into their B team, which is just insane if you ask me. But Renault, it's tough, isn't it? Because as far as I've understood, I could be wrong, but I don't think Renault have formally signed on for 2021 yet, or I could be wrong. But for the way I understand it, there's no long-term plan in place yet for Renault. So that puts a lot of doubts over the likes of Dan Ricciardo, who's gone there on the hopes of stepping up and pushing forward with Renault. It puts a lot of things in doubt, and I think Renault now, they're under a lot of pressure, especially Cyril Abiteboul. They're under a huge amount of pressure because this year they've gone backwards so far anyway, and then they'll have next year one last year with McLaren, and if they can't challenge McLaren again next year, it's not going to look good for them, is it? If they for the next 2 seasons lose out to their customer team twice before they leave to Mercedes, then they're going to be on their own. They're going to be, in my opinion, on the back foot going into 2021, which is not. It's not good. Like you say, the shareholders, or have you be looking at it and thinking, is it worth our money? Is it worth all our investment for us to be finishing fifth at best, sixth at best? Because Renault, they've won world championships, haven't they? They've been the best F1 car in past. So why would they want to settle for finishing mid to bottom 10 in the races and possibly fifth or sixth of the championship? That's not with this, especially the amount of money they invest in. It's not where they want to be, and it is, for me. It's a real worry that you might not see Renault in the long term future in Formula One if this starts to fall away for them.
Yeah, it's really it's going to be really interesting, and a lot of thoughts going to have to go in at Renault in the future, because this is a huge amount of money that they're gonna potentially miss out on, and like you said, there's going to be plenty of people sitting in the boardroom in France thinking, where do we go from here? We've ploughed a fortune into making this team and saying, do you know what, it's going to be, we're going to challenge the big boys, we're going to go up against, we're aiming for podiums, we're going to bring in Daniel Ricciardo, and like you say, $28 million contract, which I think makes him the third highest. I think Lewis is on 40 million. So it's a huge investment for them, and for it to, as it is at the moment, not work at all. They're going to lose their drivers. Of course, they've got Ocon coming in, who they're taking off of Mercedes, and they've got Daniel Ricciardo on this huge contract. But Daniel Ricciardo is only contracted through to the end of next season as well, so he could potentially, and we were talking about last week, he could potentially be off to Ferrari. We don't know, obviously, what Seb's going to do and where Ferrari would look at going, but we know that they're not massively involved in promoting youth, and Charles Leclerc was a bit of an anomaly for that. It was too good of an option to turn it down. So, and if Daniel Ricciardo's available, you'd take him. So I don't know, Renault, they are kind of, with this deal falling apart, and like you said, how it fell apart with Red Bull, and we saw on the Netflix show just sort of the frosty nature that Cyril Abiteboul had with Christian Horner, and the fact that they don't seem to be able to really bring people in, and there was a news story that came out today actually about the fact that Campos, who are an F3 and an F2 team, are trying to enter themselves into 2021, which would be interesting, because Jean Todt did say that he wasn't expecting to see any new teams in for when the new regulations come in, but Campos have said that they would like to enter a team if it's financially possible, and that they would potentially be powered by Renault, which would be interesting, because then I mean they currently run Renault junior driver. The Campos team run Renault junior drivers, and Jack Aitken in F2 at the moment, and then down in F3 as well. So it's there is the opportunity if we see new teams join the championship, but if we don't, like you said, it can be it could almost be a killer for Renault, because if they've put all this money into Formula One and they're not getting anything out of it, and they're not winning races or championships, that money will slowly start to dry up, because you'll just get the shareholders losing faith in what the team can do, and it might be another team that we see like with Williams, that just lose money, lose sponsors, and we've seen what happened with Williams. They've had to all completely scale back everything and start from ground zero.
Yeah, I agree. And just quickly, you talk about Daniel Ricciardo and maybe a Ferrari switch, but for me, there's one person you've completely missed out for 2021 is Max Verstappen. I think he's going to have a look at one of the big teams eventually, because if this Red Bull Honda thing does not work out fighting for championships, he's not going to stay at that Red Bull team for much longer, is he? So you've got the Max Verstappen potential there in the mix as well. And if I was Ferrari, who are you going to pick, Max or Dan? And I'd pick Max all day personally. Dan's in his 30s now. Max has still got a big future in F1, and I think just saying on Dan, he could find himself in a really sticky position come the end of his contract at Renault, just because he might find that he's struggling to find a seat other than his Renault seat available anywhere else, because you've got, like you mentioned, Lando and George and a few other young drivers now, all vying for these big seats. Personally, I think Dan's opportunity has been and gone now. I think he should have stayed at Red Bull, where he could have still been fighting Caesar for race wins. And he's obviously made, in my opinion, a mistake going to Renault. And now any move anywhere else would probably only be a sideward step, because if Max Verstappen's available, I think any top team would snap their hands off at him.
Yeah, that's a great shout actually. So I was actually looking at a funny stat about Max Verstappen. I say funny, that he's going to be amazing if it happens. But if he races until his mid-30s, like we see with quite a lot of drivers like Seb and Lewis, I think the current leader of most Grand Prix raced is Rubens Barrichello, and I think it's 319, possibly 317. It's around that total. But if Max continues until he's the same age as what we've seen these sort of guys retire at, he's going to amass over 500 Grand Prix, which
Wow.
is incredible to think that might
Wow.
happen. So yeah, that's a stat and a half. But yeah, Max, big shout to possibly going in at Ferrari. That'd be brave of them to put Max up alongside Charles, because that is if they've got problems with Seb and Charles at the moment, I can't imagine what they're going to get from a fiery
Yeah.
Monegasque and a fiery Dutchman. So yeah, 2021, I can't wait for it. It's going to be a banging season. But we'll just round up our chat about McLaren Mercedes, and we'll just finish up with sort of where we think they can go from here. And looking through the history of McLaren, they've used, obviously most recently Honda, or Renault now, but most recently Honda, and then in the early 90s it was Peugeot and Ford, but it was McLaren Mercedes 1995 through to 2014, known as the Silver Arrows in that time, and it was 97 through 2005. Of course, had Adrian Newey on board. And champions in 98, 99, Mika Hakkinen, of course 2000 and 2008 with Lewis Hamilton, almost 2007 with Lewis Hamilton as well. In that time, several different race winners. So what is the potential for a McLaren Mercedes going forward? Is it back to the glory days that we saw sort of in the late 90s and with Lewis, or is it a case of they've got a lot of work to do? We know that they've recently invested in a new wind tunnel. So is the potential be there that we will see a big four, not just this big three that we've seen recently?
Quite easily, yeah. And I think Andreas Seidel said it would really show where they need to work on it in terms of chassis and aerodynamics on the car when they do finally get this Mercedes engine in, because there's nowhere to hide from them. They've got to work on it. But I can't see personally, as much as I'd love them to be right back up there winning races again, I personally can't see it that happening that quickly. I think they're still on this path upwards, and obviously I think what it will do short term, I think it will upset a lot of the midfield teams, especially like your Force Indies, your Haas, your Renaults as well. That's not, sorry, Force India. I keep saying Force India Racing Point. Sorry, because they're already finding it tough now, McLaren, with these Renault engines, because they've managed to get this this car going well. But if they bolt then a Mercedes engine into the back of it, it's not only going to keep them ahead of them, but it's going to push them further away, in theory, from these teams. So it's going to make it even harder to catch up to the top four positions. So like you say, it could be, instead of a big top three, it could be end up being a big top four, where you have the likes of Red Bull and McLaren fighting it out for race wins throughout a season. But ultimately, I think it'll end up boiling down to being probably Ferrari and Mercedes fighting for the championship short term. But if McLaren can get to the point where they are fighting for podiums and race wins alongside Red Bull, I think they would be pretty chuffed with that, wouldn't they? Because Red Bull, they're still quite far out of reach at the moment because they're so superior with their car. So if they were able to bridge that gap to them, that would be a good first step. Because for me, you can't go too far overboard with expecting race wins and championships and everything else just because you've put an engine in the bank. There's so much more to an F1 car, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think even just little steps, and yes, they are still with Renault, but I think they are on the way back, which is good because obviously it was a very difficult time to not just be a McLaren fan, but be a Formula One fan, because you look at these big teams that are struggling, and you'd have to be pretty heartless at the moment to be enjoying what's going on at Williams, knowing the history of that team, and so it would be good to see them back. What you would say is back at where they belong, and that's the top end of the grid. So yeah, it's going to be hopefully a positive move for them, and they'll be able to prosper from it. But a nice segue of prospering and good moves. Was it a good move for Ferrari to tell Sebastian to move over this weekend? Of
No,
obviously Russian Grand
no.
Prix. What's your opinion on this after the start? Of course, running down to turn one, he came across to cover off Lewis, but then made sure that he gave Seb the run down to T1. Seb got the inside line through T2 into T3, and unfortunately disobeying team orders to let Charles back through. Charles holding his tongue somewhat after obviously saying that he wasn't going to call out the team over the radio, and but voicing his displeasure that Seb had seemingly gone back on a pre-race agreement. What's your opinion on this?
I think it's absolutely nonsense to be having these sort of team calls like this. To be honest, I think Seb started off his race. His start off the line was probably better than Charles and Lewis's, and he'd already got the move done pretty much on Lewis before that toe had even really kicked in. And for me, I don't think Charles had really race pace wise in that race. He just didn't look really that on it, to be fair, compared to Seb. Seb was pumping in these fastest laps. Now you can argue that he was potentially doing that to keep the gap, but still, Charles wasn't really getting close to him, was he? And when they're telling Seb on the radio, let Charles through, he was 1.5, 1.8, 2 seconds ahead. You can't tell Seb to drop 2 seconds. Well, it'd eventually be more than 2 seconds, wouldn't it, for him to slow right down just to let Charles pass. I think Ferrari, they're getting into a very good habit, aren't they, of making it difficult for themselves instead of just letting the race pan out first and see what happens, and then just let them go for it. They had the opportunity. Yes, I understand Seb had the DNF, which was out of their control, but Ferrari had the opportunity to take another 1-2 at this race, and they should have comfortably took it 1-2. And instead of squabbling on the radio and who should be in the lead and who should be doing this, let them just race. Let them just get on with it. Why do we need to be saying you need to give me a position, you need to give me a position? All this, I think it's absolute nonsense. Just let them both race. Both of them are really close in the championship. I don't think it's fair. If it was the other way around, I wouldn't have thought it was fair. I just think it's just stupid, to be honest. And once Seb had built that gap up, there was no way he could have let Charles pass, because Lewis wasn't like hot on the tail of Charles, but he wasn't out of reach either, was he? He was there or thereabouts. So if they tried to mess about on track with letting Seb pass, Lewis would have pounced on that, wouldn't he? He's not going to turn down an opportunity to take a move on one or two of the Ferraris. So then for Ferrari to to leave Seb out for as long as he did, which I think was it was them imploding on themselves. If I'm being honest, they should have pitted Seb in the lap after and covered off that Mercedes threat just in case of any safety cars or anything else, which ended up proving the case. Yes, it was the Ferrari what caused the safety car, but still, if there was another safety car wasn't the cause of Ferrari, Lewis and Mercedes could have easily pounced on it then, and Ferrari would have missed out. So I think, to be honest, Ferrari just need to cut out all the silliness and just get on back to basics and let them race. There's no, my opinion, there's no need for all this. Give me a place, give me. It just sounds very school playground like give me the ball, give me the ball. No, just get on with it and race. In my opinion, and I think Seb defying orders. I just think that on the day Charles just wasn't as quick as Seb, and Seb proved it throughout the race until his DNF.
Russia is very hard to follow cars in. But that's been proved before, and so the dirty air wouldn't have helped Charles trying to catch up. And he did say that the dirty air wasn't helping him catch up. And I don't know. I think the problem is that Seb now has precedent of doing this twice. He obviously the very famous Multi 21 with Mark Webber in Malaysia, and now this is the second time that he's disobeyed a team instruction. And whether it's right or not, I think that the problem is with Ferrari is that the Ferrari will not allow their two cars to battle each other. We've seen that for years and years and years. They've never liked their cars going side by side. They've never liked the potential where both cars might take each other out. And I don't think that will stop anytime soon. I don't think that we're going to see a position where they're going to allow. I mean, we saw back in Bahrain that they told Charles to hold position, and Charles took it upon himself to. He was just too close. He's like, I had to make the move. And I mean, we saw in Canada that they kept Charles out, I think it was, so that he didn't get involved in a battle with Seb Vettel. And equally, there's been other races where they've strategically moved the pit stops around for both players to get them out of a fighting position. So it's a bit of a trifecta of a expletive there, because you've got a team not wanting something to happen. You've got two drivers that Seb will want to prove to everyone that he's still got it. He's got this young upstart. We know what he's like when he doesn't like to be challenged by who he considers to be a number two driver. He thinks he's the number one. He won't like to be challenged by Charles. You've got Charles, who is, if not then one of the next big things in Formula One. The most likely next world champion up against Lewis Hamilton because of what he's currently sitting in, the fact that he's taken now all the pole positions consistently since the summer break, and equally he's been strong in the race. And you've got this big old sort of mix and mess of different tangible differences between the drivers, and Seb, I think I understand why he stayed ahead. I probably would have done the same. I would have thought I got ahead at the start. It's a start. But if he had, this is the problem: is if he had said beforehand, if you give me the draft, then and I take the lead, then I will give it back. Now, regardless of your pace, you can't have a team dynamic where both drivers trust each other. And then you break a promise like that, because you see what happens when drivers or when teammates come to blows, and the problem is this now the flashpoint? Is this where it gets worse and worse? Because we saw with Hamilton and Rosberg, it started off with they were allowed to fight each other, and it got a little bit close, but it wasn't too bad. And then obviously it got worse and worse and worse, and we had the incident in Spain where where Rosberg squeezed Hamilton onto the grass, and then he ended up taking them both out. We saw them come into contact with Belgium. So I think Ferrari are terrified of having that same happen to them. But at the moment, they're kind of the way that their season has gone. It's kind of almost inevitable, but it was their own sort of it was their own real mistake this weekend that cost them the race win, because they did try and keep Seb out longer so that it would give Charles the lead back again. It was literally a punishment to Seb. It was, we're just going to keep you out on track until Seb's you've not got a big enough gap to maintain the lead, and it happened. He managed to come up behind Charles, and unfortunately for him, Seb then had an MGUK failure on his outlap. So Ferrari have really literally taken the monocle of masters of their own downfall.
Yeah, for me, I don't understand why they're even agreeing on this. Uh, I'll give you a toe, you let me pass, and all this. I don't understand it personally. I don't hear of other teams doing such a thing. I could be wrong, but I just think it's just all a bit ridiculous, to be honest. And it, like you say, it all boils down to just Ferrari beating themselves. Really, they've had opportunities to win a lot more this season. Yeah, they've sometimes it were out of their hands, like in Bahrain, but there was a huge opportunity for them to win in Russia and keep that momentum going from what they have been doing, and they've just pretty much cost themselves now. Well, they were never really going to win the constructors, but Mercedes now, I think, if I'm right in saying, can win the constructors in Japan. So I just Ferrari, for me, this is why I could never support Ferrari, because they're always incapable of making clever decisions. They always seem to implode on themselves and make silly calls which don't need to be made. And you always hear it on the radio. I'm sure they said to Seb at one point during Russia, we're on to Plan C now. I'm sure Ferrari at some point this season have been through the whole alphabet of plans. I think it's just balmy, to be fair. And Russia's one of those. For me, I'm glad I'm not a Ferrari fan, because I'd have felt incredibly frustrated and annoyed how that Russian Grand Prix ended up for Ferrari, because they were comfortably the quickest car all weekend, and it turned out they didn't even finish first or second. They finished third and one DNF, which is definitely not what they expected. I just think they should just get back to basics and go racing.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, it's been a little bit of trend for Ferrari this season of just making silly mistakes when it comes to strategy, and yeah, this one came back to bite them and cost them another race win, and probably a 1-2 after the pace that they've had. But it was Mercedes that got 1-2, another race win for them, and they've dominated Russia now. And although probably not undeserved, but probably slightly fortuitous after what happened with Ferrari, and but that does make it a 1-2 for them, so they'll be delighted with that. But you look down through the field, and I think a driver I just want to quickly highlight, and he is one that I've talked about quite a lot in the podcast, big fan of his. Alex Albon started from the pit lane, and after crashing out in qualifying, he came back and finished fifth. Has he done enough, or is he doing enough to secure that Red Bull seat for 2020?
I just want to point out one thing. I don't believe Alex Albon would have finished fifth if it weren't for that safety car. That was very fortunate of him and a few others, because Carlos Sainz was comfortable where he was at that point, and because the safety car came out at the point it did, it allowed Alex to come in on those soft tyres, and as soon as the field was bunched right back up again, he should be getting into fifth place from where he was, really, shouldn't he? Because if he's not in that Red Bull, then you do have to question why. I think if the field was as spread out as it was without the safety car, he'd have probably got into the points, but maybe not fifth. But like you say, from the pit lane to fifth, you can't argue with that, really. You would imagine if he keeps up doing what he's doing, you'd think he would be in line to get that Red Bull seat alongside Max, because for me, he's just at the moment he's doing a bit better than what Pierre Gasly's doing. So for me, if Alex Albon just keeps doing what he's doing, he should be all right. But it was the first weekend, I think, this weekend, Russia, where I think he was quite shown up by his teammate Max. He struggled a lot in practice, and I know he didn't need to qualify as much, but he struggled a lot throughout, and got some luck in the end, which everybody needs, and a fifth place he probably didn't expect to get, but it's good points for him and the team, and I do think he will probably end up in that Red Bull seat if he carries on scoring good points alongside Max. But I think for the long term, I think he needs to be getting a little bit close to Max if he possibly can to give him that support if Max needs it for if he's fighting for race wins or podiums.
Yeah, it was a disappointing sort of weekend for Alex in regards to qualifying and practice, because it's a track that he won in F2 the season previous, so it's not a track that it's not new to him like Singapore was. So yeah, he will be disappointed. He did just say that it was just the way the car was set up here. Of course, he had the reason why he started from the pit lane is because they changed the floor. And when they changed the floor, his pace dramatically increased. And in fact, his race pace was better than Max's when it came to consistent lap times. So yeah, he does need to challenge Max, but I mean, we've said before, Max is unfortunately on another level, so it's gonna be a real hard task for Alex if he is to sort of take it to Max. But I would like to see him push towards that podium towards the end of the season. And yeah, you did allude there with Carlos Sainz sort of unfortunately missing out because of that late safety car. And we'll just quickly touch on McLaren before the final question about or the final point about the Russian Grand Prix. They really, really lost out with that late safety car, didn't they? Because on old tyres, they were quite comfortable in, I thought it was at 5th and 6th at the time. And Lando he did a remarkable job to keep the likes of Kevin Magnussen behind. So I think it's one of those weekends for McLaren where they'll probably find themselves, they'll feel a little bit hard done by the safety car, but they'll realise they probably took away points from that were not unlikely, but with the guys around them on much fresher tyres, it's probably a little bit better with Renault kind of struggling for points on the same weekend.
Yeah, it was Nico Hulkenberg Lando managed to keep behind him. He was on fresh softs on the Renault, and Kevin Magnussen. I just before we move on, I'd like to just quickly ask you about that Kevin Magnussen 5-second penalty, because I thought that was incredibly harsh of him to give that 5-second penalty. I understand the rules, but he'd lost out massively already, and he was in that fight. I think was it Perez he was in the fight with, and for me, it was an incredibly it benefited Lando, yes, but it was an incredibly harsh penalty on Kevin, because I don't think 5 seconds was justified, to be honest. Maybe he should have got a black and white flag or something, but 5 seconds really cost him some good points this weekend.
I see. I'm fully behind that penalty. And I'm not sure if you watched the support races this weekend, but there was a huge crash between Jack Aitken, Nikita Mazepin, and Nobahari Matsushita, and that was because Nikita Mazepin decided to miss the first part of the runoff area, like how Kevin Magnussen did, and come back onto track unsafely. And yes, there are differences that Kevin, there was no one around, but it was the principle that he kept his foot flat to the floor and missed the full gate to get back on track. And they were warned, and every Formula were warned, were told, if you go offline at T2 and T3, then you need to go around the bollards. And he would have lost a little bit more time, but he probably would have caught it back up. But I don't know. I can understand the frustration, but when you look at an incident that happened earlier that day, you would have thought that all drivers go, okay, well, I'm going to go through, regardless if there's a car behind me or not. Like, it's the problem with Russia is that with so many runoff areas like that, like we saw with that crash in F2, that Aitken was pushed out wide by Mazepin. They both absolutely floored it because, of course, they started first and second. And they floored it. Jack managed to get around the bollards and go the right way. Mazepin decided to miss one of them and fight Jack to get back onto the track. And this is whilst the rest of the grid was starting to... They obviously made it around that corner, tried to come around the corner, and Mazepin just, for some reason, just cut across in front of Jack Aitken, clipped the front right and lost it straight into Matsushita. Matsushita having to then spend the next 2 nights in a Russian hospital just to make sure that he was okay because of a concussion. So it's a harsh penalty if you look at it face value, but if you look at what potential could be, like who's to say that he couldn't have gone through that bollard and absolutely floored it as he got back onto the track, got onto the marbles, and himself crashed out and had a really hard hit. We saw Roman Grosjean have a hard hit at that corner a few years ago. So I think the stewards have got to take it from a driver safety point of view.
That's fair enough. That's well said. For me, I thought it was a bit of a harsh opinion, but that's what a harsh penalty. Sorry, but that's what we're here for, to give us opinions, and it'd be interesting to hear what other people think as well, who listed what they thought of that. At the end of the day, for me, I'm not going to complain because it helped one of my drivers gain a position, so I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. I'm sure Lando was buzzing about that as well after losing out late in the race. And finally, last thing, just quickly, Ferrari, are they the favourites for every race for the rest of the season? They seem to have unlocked completely new pace. They've found this upgrade package that they've brought in the last few races. It's managed to match and beat Mercedes. We thought that Mercedes would have the power advantage in Russia. Turned out that Ferrari once again were on the ball in Russia. Do they now have the advantage over the Silver Arrows going into the rest of the season? Is it a case of trying to make up for lost time for Ferrari? Are they your de facto expected 1 and 2 over the next 3 or 4 races?
You'd imagine so, because for me, they've gone well at all different types of racetracks, haven't they? It's not been a specific type of racetrack like a Monza, for example. They've shown they can go well at all different varieties. So for me, I can't see why they wouldn't be considered that. But as long, like we touched on earlier, they need to cut out all the politics of what they have been doing and just get back to racing, and then you might start seeing more 1-2s from them. But while ever they keep up this nonsense of deciding who's going to win races and who's not, I think you're just going to only benefit Mercedes. And as well, you can't ever in the hybrid era rule out Mercedes, even if Ferrari have somehow turned a corner from now. I still would expect Mercedes from now till the end of the season to win more races, because they are the best team for a reason, aren't they? And even though Ferrari have picked up this good turn in form and found this upgrade that seems to work, which I think will bring Ferrari a few more wins from now to the season, I just don't think it will be a dominant Ferrari season from now till the end. I think Mercedes will still have plenty to say.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that at least we're going to have a little bit of a fight that we didn't have early in the season. If only we had this at the start end of the season, we might have had a slightly more exciting end, because I mean, we've already given both of our opinions on the Abu Dhabi circuit, and yeah, it looks like the championship will be wrapped up by then. But thank God for that, because hopefully they can they can get that race finished as soon as possible. So that's our main talking points done for the podcast. We're now on to the results, of course, of round 10. If you are new to us, we are an esports F1 league, and we also race on GT Sport, but on PS4 Invictus Racing League, you can go to the website invictusracingleague.com to find out all the details about us. But the results for the F1 leagues for this week, we had Monday, Tuesday, and 3 races on Wednesday, and we'll start off on Monday. Of course, no assists with Sab and I in the commentary box from 8 p.m. on this channel. So if you want to watch it and you want to watch it back, of course you can go back to all of our videos, and it's the no assist race that you can watch currently, and subscribe if you are new to the channel. But it was another win for a relatively new driver, Harry. That's his second and third races. So fantastic race for Harry in the Racing Point. Followed home by Charlie. And Speed Queen back up onto the podium. How did you find the race?
It was a fascinating race, wasn't it? So you mentioned Speed Queen there. She had a bit of an incident. I can't remember who it was with now. She was fighting at the time for 5th place and just spun her out, but she managed to avoid hitting the wall, I think, and got going again. And she soon caught up to the back of Scott, who really struggled around Singapore, didn't he? He was sat there in 3rd place for a very long time, but because he had that 3-second time penalty, unfortunately dropped down off the podium place in with Speed Queen taking her place on the podium once again. But Charlie's just doing exactly what he needs to do now. He's outscored his teammate, and if he keeps doing what he's doing, he should, in theory, be champion very soon. But just touching on Harry as well, it'd be fast. I said it in commentary on Monday night. It's going to be absolutely fascinating next season when Harry's in this league from the beginning, and then you might see an even bigger fight for the championship because 2 wins out of 3 races is very very impressive stuff in his debut first races. So yeah, it was a great race. I think Harry and Charlie realised that they didn't need to really fight each other that much, did they? Because Charlie's obviously fighting for the championship. Harry's there just to prove how quick he is. So yeah, it was a good race. Like I say, good to see Speed Queen back up on the podium. She's no stranger to the podium, is she? So yeah, it was a good Singapore race, and unfortunately for Scott, I think his championship challenge and defending is starting to slip out his fingers now.
Yeah, yeah, I believe, if my maths is correct, that if Charlie can win the title next week if he outscores Scott by 11 points. So the championship is there to be won in Canada next week. So that is there for him. And I believe the Constructors' Championship, of course, both first and second, and the drivers are Mercedes drivers. So I believe the Constructors is already sewn up. It might just be confirmed in Canada. I'll have to check the maths. In a little bit before the stream next week. So yeah, positive race for Charlie, and I would just say that it'll be as you said, it's going to be fascinating looking at those two going into next season, because it's one thing that Harry's got on Charlie at the moment is that Harry's got 2 race wins and Charlie's looking like he's going to take the title but yet to win a race. So that's going to irk him, because I'm sure those two are good mates behind the cameras and behind the wheels. So yeah, Charlie's going to want to get himself up onto the top step of the podium, hopefully, or else Harry's going to have that mental advantage going into the next season. On to Tuesday night, and it's the Realistic Performance League with Tim and Malc in the commentary box from 8 p.m. And it's a race that, of course, you're part of, and it was Skyzy who took the race win ahead of Scopefielder and Sheepy. So how did you find the race on Tuesday?
It was a bit chaotic. I decided to start at the back half of the way because I always find Singapore's a bit crazy at the start of a race into first corner, second corner, third corner. So I tried to keep out of the way, and it was a bit crazy. It thoroughly deserved in the end for Skyzy, who is now looking like he's on his way to another title in Performance League. Scopefield coming home in second. Them two just in another league. They were both in the top zone, and uh, nobody could really get near to them. Sheepy, who I think that was his first podium in the Performance League, so congratulations to Sheepy. He drove well in his McLaren. He thoroughly deserved third place. Myself, I came home in sixth in the Haas. It's a tough old race, but it's always fascinating to watch. If you don't ever get a chance to watch it, I highly recommend going to watch it on this channel here to watch Performance League. And Skyzy, I think he can claim if I'm right in saying, claim the championship next week in Canada, which will be a third one for him, like I say. So yeah, Skyzy he's been on another level this second half this season.
Yep, 8 points, and regardless of everyone else, Skyzy will win a third consecutive Performance League championship. So the Frenchman, absolutely dominant, really, really doing bits in that championship to make sure that he's going to make it a trifecta of championships. On to Wednesday, and it's the equal performance leagues. 3 leagues on a Wednesday night: F1, F2, and F3, tiered based here. And F1 was won by Harry once again. So Harry ahead of Scopefielder, who sealed the F1 title. And so Scope has been absolutely a country mile ahead of everyone else over the last few races, and has taken a plethora of wins. So he seals, with 2 races left to go, seals the title. M. Doran came in third, so the Irishman coming in third, and he'll be happy after his race on no assists on Monday night to get a podium there. So Scope, I mean, it was a great race from Harry, but you really you can't look past Scopefielder. He's just unstoppable at times, isn't he? I mean, even though he
Yeah.
didn't take the race win, he's been so consistent ever since he joined Invictus.
Yeah, huge congratulations to Schofield. He's thoroughly deserved it. I've raced against him a few times in Performance League in the past few years, and even when I've had the quicker car, he's just made me look like I'm standing still with some of the so-called lesser cars he's been in. He's a formidable opponent and thoroughly deserves the F1 championship. He, like you say, won it by a country mile this season, and he's definitely right up there, isn't he? For me, for me, anyways, he's right up there as one of the very best in Invictus. He's got everything about him when he's on form. There's not many that'll beat him.
No, absolutely not. And if he does complete the rest of his races for the rest of the season, so it's a couple more left to go, he would finish up because he will be taking a break from league racing at the end of the season. So, but if he does complete all of the races for the S racing, then he would actually be leaving on his 100th race for Invictus. So it'd be a nice way to go out, winning his second top tier title and equally going out on the 100th race. So yeah, congratulations, Scope, F1 champion already confirmed with 2 races left to go. On to F2. And it's the Warislander, the Dutch driver, who managed to somehow pull a race victory out of nowhere, and had a spin early on, and managed to come back. Started on the hard tyres, and he himself and MJ Coupe both started on the hards. Managed to drag it out to the rain period that came towards the end of the race, and overhauled the likes of Steen and Meg Lugby, and those guys were doing a fantastic job. And in fact, Meg and I were running around in third and fourth for the majority of the race, absolute nose to tail, and swapping over positions to let the other take a challenge at the guy ahead. So yeah, it was a really good race. Warislander, he once again picks up another win, and it's he's starting to pick up well, he's almost in touch of that F2 title, and I believe he can win next week if he outscores McLugby in the race around Canada. So Warislander in first position, Steen in second, and Steen will be kicking himself yet to pick up that elusive race win. He's been the most improved in probably, well, with matching O'Stephen, most improved in Invictus this year, and then McLugby came in third position. So yeah, congratulations to Warislander. He looks like he's going to make his way towards the F2 title, just has to outscore Meg Lugby next week. And on to F3 with Malc. So there's F2, of course, is Dan in the commentary box. F1 is Tim in the commentary box. F3 with Malc in the commentary box. How did F3 go for you?
F3 was an interesting race. Dan, who for me now is got one hand on the championship now. He did qualify first, but unfortunately I didn't actually see it. He had an incident towards the end of the race, which finished still on the podium, but in third place. He finished third, just behind Craig, who once again started near the back on the alternate strategy, worked his way through the field and picked up a solid second place there. But it was Luke Bailey who got his, believe that's his second win this season, Luke Bailey. So, yeah, it was a good drive from him. He claims the victory around Singapore. I think Dan now only has to finish fourth or higher next week in Canada, and that elusive F3 title will be his. He's been wanting to get hold of it for some time now. A certain somebody who I might be talking to right now kind of stole his chances of an F3 title last season. So Dan will be definitely eager to get hold of that F3 title this year, and he's surely, for me now, he's been the favourite all season, and I often practice with him, and he's very fast and looking very likely to win the F3 title. So at the moment, one hand is on that trophy, and if he can keep it clean next week in Canada and get in and around fourth or higher, he will be champion next week of F3, and he'll thoroughly deserve it.
Yeah, he's been up there for the last 3 seasons, and yeah, unfortunately, it was me that took the championship last season. I say unfortunate, I don't care at all. I was delighted. So, but yeah, he's been up there. He's been ready to take it, and he's taken his moment. And unfortunately for O'Stephen, it looks like after finishing a little bit further down the grid that it's not to be, which is not a bad thing for O'Stephen. I think he has been remarkable with his improvement over the
Yeah.
last few seasons. So yeah, he will be back next season to fight for that F3 Championship. But Dan, yeah, fourth position I believe next week seals the F3 Championship for him, and they will also himself and his long-standing teammate F1 Richard are looking to seal a second, or no, it's a third constructors championship I believe it is in the last 4 seasons possibly. So yeah, those two have worked together mightily over the last few seasons or so. So they were looking to making it another constructors championship in McLaren. So yeah, that is your results for all of the leagues: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. F1 2019, of course. Sab and I on a Monday, Tim and Malc on a Tuesday. F1 on a Wednesday is Tim, F2 is Dan, and F3 is Malc. Of course, you can watch all those races live back on our YouTube channel, invictusracingleague.com. And that is us done for this week, episode 15 in the books. And of course, we will finish up with Sab's favourite time of the week, and that is the hot lap question. Sab gets a question, and he has 1 minute to answer and give his reason for the answer. And this one, it's gonna. I'm trying to. At the last few weeks, I've been trying to really stump him. I've been trying to make him really think about his answers. So this one is going to be a genuine question with an answer. And then equally, it's going to have a follow-up question to it. So I'm going to give you a little bit more time with this one. So we've been talking about McLaren-Mercedes today. I would like you to tell me the 8 different race winners that raced for McLaren-Mercedes.
Wow. Well, you've got Mika Hakkinen, obviously, Lewis Hamilton, Jenson Button, David Coulthard.
Yep. 4 down, 4 to go.
Kimi.
Yep, that's 5.
Fernando.
Yep, that's 6. 2 more.
Did Montoya win?
He did. 1 more.
That's Can't think now.
I can tell you where they won their race.
That's definitely not going to help me. I can't think. Wow.
They won one race for McLaren.
Oh, I know it is. It's Heikki Kovalainen.
It is Heikki Kovalainen. So
as soon as you said one race, was it I'm sure it was Hungary. Wasn't it?
It was Hungary. He added his name to the list of the drivers that won their first ever race at the Hungarian Grand Prix. I believe it was Fernando Alonso, Jenson Button, Heikki Kovalainen, and Damon Hill. I think it was the drivers that have won their first race at the Hungarian Grand Prix. So, as a follow-up question to that, and this is just if you had to choose 2 of those drivers to spearhead McLaren Mercedes into the future, of course, if you'd have them all in their prime, I'm sure Mika Hakkinen is in his probably early 50s now. But who would you have as your 2 drivers as part of the McLaren Mercedes?
Mika Hakkinen and Jenson Button.
Really? Over Lewis? We can think they're at their peak.
You've got yes, but for me, if you would go back on it, Jenson Button's still the only F1 driver in 3 seasons to outscore Lewis Hamilton as a teammate. And Jenson Button kind of got under Lewis's skin at times, didn't he? Because Jenson was outperforming him. So yes, Lewis at his peak when he won the title in Brazil in 2008, and in 2007 when he should have really won. Yes, he was superb in the McLaren, but I think for overall smoothness and calmness, I'd go with Mika and Jenson.
Oh, that would be a serene paddock and a serene garage there with those 2 in there. And although 2 very serious drivers when the helmet is on, but outside, 2 really likeable drivers. So I can't really disagree with that. Jenson, probably my favourite driver of all time equally. So if you disagree, let us know. Go to the socials, Invictus RL, of course, you can let us know there, or you can go to our personal social channels at Alan Sabatino's, for Sab at GT2_driving for myself, and let us know what questions you'd like me to pose to Sab in future podcasts, and equally let us know who your dream lineup for McLaren Mercedes would be using their previous McLaren Mercedes race winners over the that 95 to 2014 period. But that is us done for this week. And we will be back for episode 16 next week, and looking forward to bringing that. Of course, we'll be back together in 2 weeks' time, because Sab unfortunately will not be joining me for the race next week, next Monday. So I will be joined by the Warislander, the almost F2 champion. So Warislander will be making a guest appearance in the commentary booth on Monday nights for No Assist Championship. But yeah, you can catch that all here on the YouTube channel. Of course, it's Invictus RL on Twitter and Instagram, Invictus Racing League on Facebook, and of course the website invictusracingleague.com, where you can find all the league tables, all the info about the league, and of course to get yourself on the grid for next season. We're coming towards the end of this season, so make sure you get your name down and you get your car on the grid ready for next season. We're always looking for new members. But thanks, Sam, for joining me for this one. And once again, have you? It's going to be a shame missing you next Monday, and hopefully you'll have a lot to talk about next Thursday when we're back on the podcast. But have a great week, guys. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you on Monday, and we will see you next Thursday.